The Nobel Peace Prize for 2025, awarded to a far-right extremist who supports warmongering and genocide. House Report 105-388 indicates the government exposed military personnel to depleted uranium and other toxins during the Gulf War. Was the Oklahoma City Federal Building blown up in 1995 to destroy military medical records related to Gulf War syndrome? And that and more coming up next. Thanks for joining me for Alternative News. It's Friday, October 17th, 2025. But before we get started, a quick 30-second commercial from my sponsor. Dubby Clean Energy Drink Mix. Lots of different flavors, including a hydration blend with electrolytes. Whether you're working an overnight shift or driving long distance, no matter what the situation is, Dubby will keep you alert and awake. Dubby energy drinks are made in the USA, FDA approved, and contain no sugar, no maltodextrin, no artificial colors or dyes, and is gluten-free. Visit the website for more flavors and products. Order Dubby Energy Drink Mix online by using the video or description link and enter code UFO1 for 10% off. And up first, the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded this week. Let's take a look.
The Nobel Peace Prize for 2025 goes to a brave and committed champion of peace, to a woman who keeps the flame of democracy burning amidst a growing darkness. The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2025 to Maria Corina Machado. She is receiving the Nobel Peace Prize for her tireless work promoting democratic rights for the people of Venezuela and for her struggle to achieve a just and peaceful transition from dictatorship to democracy.
Now, of course, this is alternative news, so I'm going to give you guys the alternative news. And so here's Benjamin Norton talking about the Nobel Peace Prize winner supporting war, basically warmongering, not just war, but warmongering, very serious, as well as genocide.
It sounds like satire, but the Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to a far-right extremist in Venezuela who has been funded for decades by the U.S. government, who has openly advocated for the U.S. military to invade Venezuela to overthrow its government, and who supports war, sanctions that have killed tens of thousands of Venezuelans, and who openly supports Israel's genocide in Gaza. Today, I'll be talking about the reality of Maria Corina Machado, who is a far-right Venezuelan coup plotter who has been funded by the U.S. government for decades, and she was just awarded the so-called Nobel Peace Prize. Now, I should point out that the Nobel Peace Prize has been extremely hypocritical for many decades. For instance, the notorious U.S. war criminal Henry Kissinger got a Nobel Peace Prize, and Kissinger was one of the worst war criminals in modern history. Former US President Barack Obama also won a so-called Nobel Peace Prize. And yet Obama bombed multiple countries, including Libya, Yemen, Somalia, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. And the Obama administration was responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths. So obviously, this is not the first time that the Norwegian Nobel Committee has been extremely hypocritical. But really, this is just next level, because as the Norwegian Nobel Committee is giving this prize, Maria Corina Machado is openly calling for the US military, for Donald Trump, to intervene in Venezuela, to invade Venezuela. But what is especially cynical and revolting about the fact that Machado won the so-called Nobel Peace Prize is that she has been openly supporting Israel as it carries out a genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza. In January of 2025, she held a meeting with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Israel, and she said, "We greatly value the support of the government of Israel." In 2024, Machado also expressed her, quote, solidarity with the state of Israel and its people in the face of the direct aggression from the Iranian regime. This is in reference to when Israel attacked Iran first and Iran responded in self-defense. Machado strongly supports Israel and wants to reestablish relations with Israel while it's carrying out genocide. Meanwhile, the current revolutionary government of Venezuela does not have relations with Israel. President Maduro has been a strong supporter of the Palestinian people for all of his political career. And his predecessor, President Hugo Chavez, who started the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela, he also broke relations with Israel, and he accused Israel of genocide against the Palestinian people. In fact, in 2018, Machado published a letter to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's now wanted by the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity that he committed in Gaza. But Machado asked Netanyahu for Israel to launch an invasion of Venezuela. She wanted Israel to overthrow Venezuela's president, Maduro. This is the far-right extremist who just won the so-called Nobel Peace Prize, who supports Israel's genocide and asked Israel to invade her country, to overthrow her country's government and president. And by the way, it's not just my opinion that Israel is committing genocide. This was the official conclusion of a United Nations commission led by world experts in international humanitarian law. They investigated and they published a report at the website of the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, concluding that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza with the full support not only of the U.S. government, but also of Venezuela's far-right U.S.-backed opposition, including people like Maria Corina Machado. Trump has launched multiple military attacks on Venezuela, killing dozens of Venezuelans without any charges or trial. The U.S. military has repeatedly bombed boats surrounding Venezuela in international waters and claimed without any evidence that supposedly they were traffickers. So the U.S. has been blatantly violating international law and waging war on Venezuela as part of an attempt to overthrow its government. And Maria Corina Machado has been openly supporting this and calling for Trump to go even further. The Financial Times interviewed Machado, and she admitted that she is working with the U.S. government to overthrow Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro. This was revealed in an article titled, U.S. Naval Buildup Bolsters Venezuelan Opposition, Leader in Hiding Says. That leader in hiding is the U.S. government-funded Machado. The Financial Times noted that the deployment of U.S. warships to surround Venezuela is part of a movement to bring down President Maduro. The U.S. has deployed its biggest military force in the Caribbean since 1994, when the U.S. attacked Haiti. In this article, Machado openly called for regime change, saying that Maduro's time is over, and the Financial Times wrote, quote, top figures in the Venezuelan opposition say they have been in touch with senior Trump administration officials to discuss how to choreograph Maduro's downfall, end quote.
And here's a live look at the Capitol on the East Coast right now at 9:12 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can't see where Trump deployed the military and other agents against the people there in that shot there. You can't see it, but there are areas of Washington, D.C. where, of course, Trump has the military going after the people, as if that makes any sense. Up next, a CIA whistleblower says the true reason the federal building was blown up in Oklahoma City was to destroy military medical records related to Gulf War syndrome. There's going to be a link in the description for the interview with this whistleblower. And of course, it's on Spotify. So we can't put it on here, but it is on Spotify. But here is a look at this House Report 105-388, which indicates the government got over 100,000 military personnel sick during the Gulf War, and they've covered it up and they deny it. And what that means, unfortunately, is it means that all of these servicemen and women who were sick, oh, my mic's a little close here, they're not going to be able to get the treatment and compensation that they need, even though they served. And I think it's a horrible thing to do. It's a horrible way to treat them and a horrible way to thank them for their service. And, this goes back to my era and, growing up. And I have a lot of family and friends in the service. I come from a military family. And so this hits home with me. And so we're going to take a look at this now. I'm not going to show everything I'm reading to you on the screen, but I'm just going to read some of this report here, this House Report 105-388. The summary is responding to requests by veterans. The subcommittee in March 1996 initiated a far-reaching oversight investigation into the status of efforts to understand the clusters of symptoms and debilitating maladies known collectively as Gulf War syndrome. We sought to ensure that sick Gulf War veterans were being diagnosed accurately, treated effectively, and compensated fairly for service-connected disabilities despite official denials and scientific uncertainty regarding the exact causes of their ailments. I'm not sure why they word it that way. They should be a little more direct and firm, because they beat around the bush and they indicate that they know that it's from depleted uranium and stuff like that. We'll get into it here for a few minutes as we dive deep into this. It says here, we also sought to determine whether the Gulf War research agenda was properly focused on the most likely, not just the most convenient hypothesis to explain Gulf War veterans' illness. After 19 months of investigation and hearings, the subcommittee finds the status of efforts on Gulf War issues by the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Department of Defense, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Food and Drug Administration to be irreparably flawed. We find those efforts hobbled by the institutional inertia that mistakes motion for progress. It goes on to explain that more. 6 years and hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent in the effort to determine the causes of the illnesses besetting Gulf War veterans. And when it comes to the diagnosis, treatment, and research for Gulf War veterans, the federal government too often has a tin ear, cold heart, and a closed mind. Our hearings convinced us the journey from cause to cure for Gulf War veterans runs through the pools, clouds, plumes, and toxins in which they lived and fought. It is a journey the Veterans Administration and Department of Defense might never have taken but for persistent pressure from this subcommittee and other House and Senate panels that forced the Pentagon to acknowledge a watershed event, the probable exposure of United States troops to chemical weapons fallout at Chemisiyah, Iraq. So it goes on to say that I might as well finish this last paragraph. I think it's important. With that first admission, the three pillars of government denial, no credible detections, no exposures, no health effects, began to crumble as the number of U.S. troops presumed exposed grew from 400 to almost 100,000. The credibility of other chemical detections was sustained, and as it goes on to say some more there, but that doesn't sound too good, folks, you know? It sounds pretty bad. And what I can do is I can continue some more of that. There's not a lot more, but there is some more. Let's take a look here at what I've got from that House report. Okay. And it says, as far as the diagnoses related to this stuff, it gives a number of bullet points here. One, the VA, which is the Veterans Administration, and the Department of Defense did not listen to sick Gulf War veterans as to possible causes of their illnesses. Two, the presence of a variety of toxic agents in the Gulf War theater strongly suggests exposures have a role in causing, triggering, or amplifying subsequent service-connected illnesses. Three, Gulf War troops were not trained to protect themselves from the effects of exposure to depleted uranium dust and particles. And it talks a lot about the depleted uranium that we used in Sabbat rounds and the fallout of it, that it hurt our own personnel. Four, peridostigmine bromide PB can have serious side effects and interactions when taken in combination with other drugs, vaccines, chemical exposures, heat, and/or physical exercise. the VA and the DoD Health Registry diagnostic protocols relied on the unfounded conclusion there were no chemical, biological, or other toxic exposures to U.S. troops in the Gulf War theater, which was totally untrue. How can they conclude that? How can they conclude that our troops had no exposure to any of these toxins when our own military knows that we loaded depleted uranium into our Sabot rounds and then we launched them at the enemy? Then after that, we went and we invaded on the ground. And we looked through some of those vehicles and went on them and stuff. It says here, number 6, the VA and DoD Health Registry diagnosis protocols continue to be based on the unwarranted conclusion that unless there is an immediate and acute reaction, exposures to chemical weapons and other toxins do not cause delayed or chronic symptoms. How can they say that? This stuff's all nonsense. Their positions are all nonsense. They just don't want to be, they don't want to compensate. They don't want to give compensation, so they don't want to be responsible. Number 7, prematurely ruling out toxic exposures as causative. The Veterans Administration and Department of Defense doctors relied on diagnoses of somatoform disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder to explain Gulf War veterans' illnesses. So basically, they're blaming Gulf War syndrome on PTSD. They're telling them, oh, you just have PTSD. Number 8, there is no credible evidence that stress or PTSD causes the illnesses reported by many Gulf War veterans. And I can say this firsthand, I know, because I don't have any of the Gulf War syndrome symptoms. And I do have PTSD personally myself. I can say that as a side note. There is no credible evidence that stress or PTSD causes the illness as reported. I already read that. Number 9, accurate diagnoses of veterans' illnesses remain difficult due to inadequate or missing personal medical records, missing toxic detection logs, and unreleased classified documents. This is number 9, and this is what I'm getting into here. Where did they go? Where did these documents disappear to? Because this report here that I'm reading to you guys is from 1997. Now we know that in 1995, the federal building in Oklahoma City was blown up. Number 10, accurate diagnoses of veteran illnesses was also hampered by the VA's lack of medical expertise in toxicology and environmental medicine. Number 11, exposure to low levels of chemical warfare agents and other toxins can cause delayed chronic health effects. Oh yeah, they can. Treatment, and it gets into treatment. Neither the VA nor the DoD has systematically attempted to determine whether sick Gulf War veterans are any better or worse today than they first reported when they first reported symptoms. So that's that. And that was 3. Let me try to get myself organized here because I'm not. There's 2. Okay. So we're going to continue in a moment reading from that report. This is going to be an extended episode tonight, a special edition here as I'm digging deep into this. And I just want to cover it very thoroughly. And I'll pull it back up for everyone here as we're going over this House Report 105-388. You can read it. I'm going to put a link in the description for it. There's going to be a lot of links in the description for all of this stuff that we're talking about. And let me continue here. So Congress should enact a Gulf War Toxic Exposure Act establishing the presumption as a matter of law that veterans were exposed to hazardous materials known to have been present in the war theater. The VA should contract with an independent scientific body composed of non-government scientific experts representing, at a minimum, the disciplines of toxology, immunology, microbiology, molecular biology, genetics, biochemistry, chemistry, and so forth. So I'm not going to read through all of this because it gets kind of long. But that was number 5, right? That was number 5. And just bear with me here. So we're talking about a lot of money that the government would have to pay all these people, and some estimates are that up to 500,000 or more military personnel could have been sick during the Gulf War, are affected by this, and it's been covered up. That they're saying that could be enough to bankrupt the government and the military, so that's why they supposedly blew up this building. And I'll read a little bit more from this report. And it says here, there's a section where it talks about listening to Gulf War veterans. Among Gulf War veterans testifying before the subcommittee were Stephen Wood, Barry Kaplan, Chris Corvin, Julia Dykeman, and Brian Martin, all of whom reported health complaints typical of maladies often called Gulf War syndrome. Army Staff Sergeant Stephen Woods testified that during the first week of March 1991, he drove through ammunition storage sites destroyed by U.S. forces near a bombed-out bunker. He inspected artillery rounds on the ground, which he identified in an Army manual as chemical weapons. Later that day, Sergeant Wood stated, quote, "I started to get very sick with symptoms I suffer still today. I sought medical assistance that day. Never once received any comprehensive, much less compassionate treatment from the Army. I was told it was all in my head," unquote. Transferred back to Germany following the war, his symptoms continued. In 1994, Sergeant Wood, unable to get treatment from any Army doctors and unable to perform his duties, contacted a German physician. And he said that the German doctor did more tests in 2 hours than the Army did in 5 years. And then it goes on to talk about Major Barry Kaplan, a career Army pilot who had passed 15 flight physicals in the 11 years prior to deployment to the Gulf War, and how Barry he began to feel very ill in April of 1991, but dismissed the symptoms as related to, the harsh desert environment And then on May 8th, he reported, quote, violent nausea, vomiting, diarrhea attack, unquote. On May 29th, now back in Germany, he was admitted to a military hospital with cardiac arrhythmias, severely bleeding gums, cough with sputum production, shortness of breath, severe fatigue. Basically, he was all messed up. He was extremely sick. He says that he had hair loss, skin rashes, lesions, abdominal discomfort, a bunch of stuff. Military doctors diagnosed him with PTSD for all of that stuff I just mentioned. By the way, I have PTSD and I don't have any of that stuff that was just mentioned. My hair's been falling out since my late 20s, my early 30s. It has nothing to do with, I was never exposed to any of this stuff that is related to Gulf War syndrome, luckily. So, let's see what we got here. And that was... Okay, I hope I'm not skipping past any of these. We're going to look at depleted uranium in a moment. We'll talk about depleted uranium. There's 2 more short sections to this, folks. I apologize for that commercial. Let me get rid of that. How many things are on the screen here? I'm a little bit disoriented. There we go. I'm back now, folks. So there's another section on depleted uranium that we're going to talk about here really briefly. And let's take a look. And depleted uranium is a highly toxic radioactive byproduct of the uranium enrichment process. They used it in munitions as armor-piercing rounds fired at enemy tanks and as protective armor on U.S. tanks. When a DU penetrator impacts a hard target, most of the round burns up, scattering uranium dust and shrapnel in and around the target. In the Gulf War, DU, which again means depleted uranium, is credited with destroying over 1,400 Iraqi tanks as well as other equipment and weapons storage facilities. Here's the problem, folks. They didn't tell our personnel that they were going to use that. A lot of them weren't trained on how to protect themselves from the exposure and the fallout. And you're talking about radioactive material when you're talking about depleted uranium. Extremely dangerous. Says here, exposure to DU armor and/or penetrators is dangerous, but DU poses the greatest risk to those who breathe smoke or dust from a burning vehicle hit by DU rounds. So all you need to do is blow up a bunch of vehicles and then breathe in the smoke from the damage you just caused, and you're going to get yourself sick from the damage you just caused as you're sitting there smiling looking at the damage you just caused. Climb on or enter a vehicle hit by a DU round. Very, very dangerous to do. You're going to get yourself sick. Or were in friendly fire incidents involving DU rounds. One of the more severe DU exposure events occurred in July 1991 in Doha, Kuwait, when a major U.S. Army ammunition depot and motor pool exploded and burned for 2 days. Depleted uranium armor on vehicles and 9,000 pounds of depleted uranium rounds were oxidized to powder, exposing 3,500 soldiers in the vicinity to radiation and DU aerosol particles that were widely distributed by high winds. Oh my goodness, it was also windy, they're saying. So that really spread it even more. Soldiers involved in the cleanup several days after the fire were not warned. Oh my God. Oh, it just gets worse and worse. So then they send people in to clean it up, and it says they were not warned of DU contamination, and therefore they wore no protective gear. Oh my God. So they also must have got real sick, and some of them probably died. All right, I'm going to stop with the depleted uranium after that. That's bad. That's just bad. It's horrible. You know what, folks? I think I accidentally deleted a couple sections of this. I know it's getting lengthy. So, that's okay. That's okay. There is still one more section. I want to show everyone what we're looking at here. And we're talking about this House Report 105-388. And it gets into Gulf War syndrome and how our government is covering it up. How our government got a bunch of our people sick and they're covering it up. Our people would get sick. They wouldn't tell our people that. So we were using depleted uranium in sabot rounds in our own weapons, launching it at the enemy. And this stuff is extremely dangerous and toxic. It's radioactive. And we got a bunch of our own people sick. And instead of helping our own people, the government has been covering it up and denying it. But here's a Congress.gov House report from 1997. And there's a CIA whistleblower. There's a link in the description. You can listen to it on Spotify. He says that the reason why the Oklahoma City building was blown up was to destroy the medical records related to this Gulf War syndrome that we're talking about here. So, impact on veterans of the missing records. Personal medical records of veterans, including sick call records, are inadequate or missing. Documents which could help verify possible exposure and military unit locations remain in DoD files. Most of the military nuclear, biological, chemical logs, which are records of toxic warfare agent detections, are missing or destroyed. Readouts from chemical detection equipment have vanished. Many CIA intelligence logs concerning Iraqi chemical biological weapons, storage depots, and manufacturing facilities, and documents concerning enemy capabilities and intentions to use CBW again, which is chemical biological weapons against U.S. troops, have remained unreleased since the war. All this critical information comprises the complete medical history of each Gulf War veteran. In the absence of full documentation needed to prove a service connection, sick veterans have a difficult, if not impossible, task of receiving proper medical treatment and fair compensation. Since no government low-level exposure research is available, proof of toxic exposure as a cause of medical disability is nearly impossible to obtain. Furthermore, the burden of proof that the disability or illness is service-connected falls on the veteran exclusively under current VA regulations. So, what they're saying here basically is our guys can't get sick. They're sick and they can't get the medical treatment that they need. The VA's not helping them. They can't get disability that they need and stuff like that. Very, very bad situation. So we're going to move on, though. I covered that, talked about that quite a bit there for now. Up next, Amy Goodman with news from the Middle East.
Hamas has released the remaining 20 living Israeli hostages who've been held in Gaza for the past 2 years. Red Cross vehicles carried the captives from Gaza to Israel. Hamas is also in the process of handing over the bodies of 28 Israeli captives who've been confirmed dead. In exchange, Israel is releasing nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners, many of whom had been held without charge. This all comes as part of the first phase of a U.S.-backed 20-point plan. Earlier today, President Trump addressed the Israeli Knesset.
Like the USA right now, it will be the golden age of Israel and the golden age of the Middle East.
A group of leftist Israeli lawmakers briefly interrupted Trump's address by waving a sign calling him to recognize Palestine. Trump heads next to Sharm el-Sheikh, where he and the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi will co-host what's being described as a peace summit. Leaders and officials from 27 countries are scheduled to attend. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was invited. First, it was believed he was going, but now it's believed he will not be attending. Celebrations have been held across Israel today as hostages held in Gaza reunite with their families.
I waited for this day so much. 2 years we've been waiting for the hostages to come back home, for the war to stop, for the soldiers to come back home. This is a historic day. This is a happy day. They're coming home.
Meanwhile, Israeli officials have threatened to arrest Palestinians in the occupied West Bank if they celebrate the release of Palestinian prisoners held in Israel. Since the ceasefire began on Friday, tens of thousands of Palestinians have streamed back into northern Gaza to find their old neighborhoods reduced to ruin. New drone footage shows vast areas of northern Gaza where every structure has been destroyed or heavily damaged. In recent days, Palestinians have retrieved more than 295 bodies that have been trapped under the rubble from Israeli attacks. Mahmoud Abu Amira is a Gaza City resident who returned to find his home destroyed.
This was the most beautiful place, this camp. But now you can see it's rubble, destruction. Life isn't life anymore. We can't find water. We can't find food. We can't find anything to drink. It's like we've gone back to disaster. It's like a nightmare, something you would have never imagined seeing. Tell me, could you ever have imagined this happening to you? I ask myself. No, we never imagined something like this could happen to us. A machine of destruction, a machine of war.
In other news from Gaza, the prominent Palestinian journalist Salah al-Jafarawi was shot dead Sunday by an Israeli-backed Palestinian militia in Gaza City. In other news from Gaza, drop site news reports Israeli forces in recent days set fire to civilian infrastructure, including the destruction of an essential sanitation plant in Gaza City.
And last, I leave everyone with the Raw deal, which was... I'm going to leave you guys with the first 20 minutes of the Raw deal that was recorded live earlier today, featuring Professor James Fetzer. Have a great night, everyone.
We begin with news stories abroad. Ukraine's strategy against Russia: escalate and provoke. The situation is getting increasingly troubling. President Trump announced plans today for another summit with Russian President Vladimir Putin, this time in Budapest, Hungary. The meeting will take place at a date to be determined after high-level advisors from the two countries meet next week, he said in a Truth Social post yesterday. Trump expressed hope after a phone call with Putin that by meeting face-to-face, the two leaders will be able to bring the bloody Russian-Ukraine war to an end. Thursday's 84-minute phone call, not quite an hour and a half, was a very productive one, he said. I believe great progress was made with today's phone conversation. Meanwhile, U.S. depleted its missiles in Ukraine and in Israel. Now it wants more fast. Citing low munition stockpiles, the Pentagon is urging weapon contractors to accelerate missile production, doubling or even quadrupling production rates to prepare for possible war with China. By the way, I think all this open talk about war with China is very counterproductive. And remember, China owns land right here in the United States. Who knows what they have done with it or how they'd be prepared to take advantage of those locations should a war with China break out. Namely, it hopes to boost production rates for 12 types of missiles it wants on hand, including Patriot interceptors, Standard Missile-6 THAAD interceptors, and Joint Air Surface Standoff missiles. Replenishing now depleted missile stockpiles is important for U.S. military preparation, but experts tell responsible statecraft this ambitious missile production ramp-up is a time-intensive, costly, and logistically challenging endeavor that may ultimately fail without substantial financial commitment from the DoD, of course. Money, money, money. Many believe the U.S. is on a war economy and that absent wars, we would collapse. Meanwhile, the Gaza ceasefire is hanging by a thread. Again, responsible statecraft. The ceasefire agreement in Gaza is hanging by a thread as both Israel and Hamas face allegations of violating the terms of the deal, which went into force on Monday. Israel claims Hamas has been dragging its feet on returning the remains of deceased hostages. So far, the Palestinian armed group has only managed to deliver the bodies of 9 of the remaining 28 deceased. Hamas claims it's moving as quickly as it can given the difficulties of finding bodies that may be buried under rubble or hidden deep in bombed-out tunnels. But that hasn't stopped Israel from threatening to resume fighting, an act to achieve a total defeat of Hamas. In fact, on the Israeli side, it's disingenuous. It's a pretense because they knew from the beginning with their agreement with Hamas that would be impossible to return all of the dead, given many were buried under rubble that would be very difficult to extract. Israel knew it completely. It was always the plan to use that as an excuse to resume the attacks. Meanwhile, we have Patrick J. McShay explaining Trump's Gaza peace plan is a masterclass in colonialism. You can find it on my blog at jameshfetzer.org. President Trump has entered into another peace plan in occupied Palestine, and the media is praising the deal. Some Democrats have also praised it, even Hillary. Still, given the poor history of Israel abiding by such ceasefire agreements, it's hard to believe anyone paying attention doesn't believe this peace deal will be short-lived. Bibi Netanyahu, who is extremely unpopular in Israel, is under immense pressure to free the hostages. Once they return to Israel, Bibi will have little incentive to continue the ceasefire. And of course, as we know, it has moved forward a pace. Meanwhile, Trump threatens to go and kill Hamas over eternal clashes. This is bizarre. President Trump on Thursday, yesterday, threatened that we would have to go in and kill Hamas in Gaza if the group continues killing alleged criminals and Israeli collaborators, reversing his previous support for Hamas armed action. These are Palestinians who are betraying Hamas. They're Israeli spies, which is the reason they're subjecting them to execution. If Hamas continues to kill people in Gaza, which was not the deal, we will have no choice but to go in and kill them. Thank you for your attention to the matter. Over the weekend, dozens were killed in clashes with Hamas and other militias in Gaza. Some Palestinians were summarily executed, but it's unclear if there have been any internal clashes or executions in Gaza in recent days, while Israeli forces have continued to kill Palestinians despite the ceasefire, something Trump has not condemned. Meanwhile, U.S. Central Command issues a warning to Hamas contradicting Trump. U.S. Central Command Wednesday issued a statement urging Hamas to stop executing Palestinians, contradicting earlier comments from President Trump. Well, I have these stories in opposite order. Hamas has carried out execution of alleged criminals and collaborators with Israel, which Trump expressed support for Tuesday, saying the group was taking out gang members. That's okay. It's a couple of very bad gangs, but now, as we can see, Trump has reversed himself to agree with Central Command about what's going on here. Meanwhile, of course, Israel is continuing to conduct heavy airstrikes in southern and eastern Lebanon. No surprise there. The UN has called for Israel to open more Gaza crossings in order to facilitate a surge in aid deliveries. But of course, they won't do it. The United Nations humanitarian chief, Tom Fletcher, has urged Israel to immediately open more crossings into famine-stricken Gaza Strip to allow for a surge in aid deliveries. In remarks to reporters Wednesday, Fletcher said the UN is seeking a dramatic boost in humanitarian aid for Gaza, saying the hundreds of released troops cleared to enter the devastated enclave were nowhere near the thousands needed to ease an humanitarian disaster. Meanwhile, Caitlin Johnson properly observes the onus is on Israel and its allies, meaning the United States, to end the genocide, not their victims.
The onus is on Israel and its allies to end the genocide, not their victims. It's actually never legitimate to withhold aid from starving civilians. It was never legitimate at any time. That's one of the annoying things about having to discuss Israel's ridiculous claim that Hamas is hoarding hostage corpses in order to achieve some kind of goal, and therefore justifies reducing aid into Gaza as punishment. The conversation skates right over the fact that it has never been legitimate for Israel to withhold humanitarian aid into Gaza. Debating whether Israel is right or wrong to withhold aid under these specific circumstances tacitly assumes that it could ever be right to withhold aid under any circumstances. Listening to Israel's justifications for why it needs to inflict monstrous abuses upon the Palestinians has the effect of assuming that there are circumstances under which those monstrous abuses could be acceptable. And there just aren't. It has never been legitimate to intentionally deprive civilians of humanitarian aid that they need to survive. You have to give them aid. It has never been legitimate to shoot non-combatants because you decided they crossed some sort of line into a forbidden zone. It has never been legitimate to shoot non-combatants at all. It has never been legitimate to commit genocide. Israel just needs to stop the genocide. The onus for stopping a genocide is on the party committing the genocide. The onus is not on the victims of the genocide to end it by meeting certain conditions. This should not even need to be said. It's so obnoxious that everyone's getting sucked into these debates about whether or not Israel might need to resume the genocide because Hamas refused to disarm, or they didn't get their hostage corpses back, or this or that ceasefire demand wasn't met, or blah blah whatever. Israel has never needed to commit genocide. It needs to stop committing genocide. The world shouldn't be bending over backwards to ensure that the state which is committing genocide is happy with the terms by which the genocide is ended. The world should be aggressively punishing the state that is committing genocide until it stops. That would be true peace. What we are seeing now is just a bad joke. And of course, this true peace is not emerging because the powerful Western states who've been backing the genocide this whole time are perfectly fine with it. Their weapons industries get to profit from the genocide. Their empire managers get to enjoy the domination of a critical geostrategic region. They sleep like babies at night because they do not view the victims of the genocide as human beings. So we find ourselves doing this ridiculous dance where we go, okay, well, maybe the genocide could stop if the victims of the genocide agree to terms X, Y, and Z, and don't make too much of a fuss about being killed in smaller numbers every day. This is madness. It's the craziest thing you could possibly imagine. We live in a dystopian madhouse.
I think that's exactly right. And get this, we have Trump actually asking the president of Israel to
a VPN and support free speech and privacy.
Pardon Bibi Netanyahu. So you got his Judge Napolitano reports here. We got one war criminal asking another war criminal to pardon a third war criminal. Here he is with Larry Johnson.
Let's recall back in January 15th, there was a ceasefire declared, and it was credited to who? Donald John Trump. That, oh man, this is amazing. Look, Trump's brokered a ceasefire. And it led to hostage release and prisoner release. And we saw the same kind of pictures we're seeing today. Oh, the joy and the happy reunions. It's terrific. And then Israel started violating that ceasefire. And Hamas said, well, then we're not releasing any more of the prisoners. The prisoners that were released today, I think they were all former, they were all Israeli military who had served, who were active duty soldiers. So I really don't put them in the same category as hostages. They are prisoners of war because war uniforms carried guns. Sorry, that's a fair fight. Grabbing a civilian is a whole different matter. So we're left in the same position that we've got all these poorly defined future steps. Is Hamas going to disarm? I don't think so. And it's not just Hamas. Again, the entire Western narrative, this is theater. They fail to understand that there are 14 different Palestinian groups. Hamas clearly is the largest and most influential, but you have Palestinian Islamic Jihad. You have the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP, the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine. There's even Abu Nidal. So each of those groups have some military capability as well. And so coming up with a comprehensive solution that includes the Palestinians, but it's like, we're going to see this kabuki theater in a little bit at the Sharm el-Sheikh Peace Summit. Except my understanding is Netanyahu's not going to be there. Hamas isn't going to be there. So the people who are actually engaged in the fighting, they're not at that discussion. And so that's like, that's like you trying to broker, you got a couple that wants a divorce, but you're going to meet with all of their friends and neighbors, but you're not going to meet with them. you're going to have no influence on that process.
Wow. I want you to take a look at the release of one of them who actually kissed his Hamas protectors. Max Blumenthal arguing that these Hamas fighters are probably the people that saved this guy's life from Israeli attacks. Watch this.
Year 49. Yes, we continue with you. A total of 24 prisoners have been successfully handed over, and importantly, they all remain alive and well. One prisoner remains, bringing the total to 25. It is expected that the process of handing over the bodies of 4 Israelis will also be completed in the coming days.
This clip is being banned by the IDF. They don't want the Israeli public to see this.
Well, let's remember early on, within the first 8 months, following the October 7th raid by Hamas, you had 3 Israeli soldiers who had been captured, who got free, who came out waving white shirts, trying to get over to the Israeli lines, and the Israelis killed them. They shot them. They were unarmed. They posed no threat. So again, you find that despite the efforts of the West to portray Hamas as these great beasts, these awful terrorists, these people that behead children, those are all Zionist lies. It was just the opposite. You find that these Palestinians exhibit a level of professionalism that is frankly not found among the Israelis. And I tell you, this goes back, 35 years ago when I was the deputy director over the Anti-Terrorism Assistance Training Program. We were providing training at that time to both Israeli police as well as to Palestinian police. And our trainers would always come back and comment that the Israelis were a clown show, but that the Palestinians were highly professional, they paid attention, and demonstrated a level of skill. And it looks like that hasn't changed over the years.
Wow. So Netanyahu is claiming this is a great victory for the Israeli public. He has yet to defeat the Palestinians. He has severely damaged Israel politically, culturally, economically, diplomatically. And now the whole world, even the United States public, questions the moral basis for the Zionist apartheid state. How the hell can he claim this is a victory?
Yeah, probably the same way Custer could claim that he won that last stand. Okay, this is perhaps a classic example of a Pyrrhic victory. The fact that after 2 years, Israel, with every military advantage, was unable not only to defeat Hamas and to eliminate them as a military threat, but was unable to rescue the hostages. And, frankly, they had an entire area surrounded, both from the sea and from land. I mean, Hamas was in a position where they didn't have ready access to supplies, for God's sake. And yet they persisted.
How did they get weapons? How did they get rounds of ammunition?
Yeah, I don't know if it was stockpiled in advance, or I'm sure they had some smuggling networks, and there were tunnels I'm sure that go that go from Egypt into Gaza, and that may have been one of the access points. But I mean, it illustrates that after 2 years, Israel could not defeat Hamas. Just like, the United States couldn't defeat the Houthis.
Right.
But it's the same kind of thing. You remember that Donald Trump claimed, okay, they capitulated, we win, we're going home. That's what Netanyahu's doing right now. But I don't think that Netanyahu and crowd had any intent whatsoever to put away their bombs and to stop killing Palestinian women and children. That's going to renew.
I've been playing this all morning, but it's priceless. Here's one war criminal asking a second war criminal publicly to pardon a third war criminal. Chris, cut number 12.
Hey, I have an idea. Mr. President, why don't you give him a pardon? By the way, that was not in the speech, as you probably know. But I happen to like this gentleman right over here, and it just seems to make so much sense. You know, whether we like it or not, this has been one of the greatest wartime presidents. This has been one of the greatest wartime presidents. And cigars and champagne, who the hell cares about it?
Well, it's $139,000 worth of cigars and champagnes. His wife has already pleaded guilty to it. And of course, Netanyahu is not the president. He's the prime minister. The person from whom Trump was asking the pardon is the president of Israel.
Right,
This is comedic. It's comical.
Well, it's it's just a reminder that Donald Trump does not believe in rule of law. He believes in the rule of cronies.